In this video, I have a look at some more advanced tricks that you can do with Bokeh.
Adorama TV presents Take and Make Great Photography with Gavin Hoey.
Hello, I'm Gavin Hoey and you're watching Adorama TV, brought to you by Adorama, the camera store that has everything for us photographers. Now, in my last video, I had a look at this thing right here, Bokeh. At least that's what I call it. You may pronounce it slightly differently. And I showed you a couple of really basic Bokeh tips to get you up and running. Now in this video, I'm going to take it to another level with 3 advanced ideas on getting the best from your Bokeh. So my first tip is probably the most useful, and it's all about combining flash, which is surprisingly bright, with the Christmas lights, which really are not. Now I'll kick off with exactly the same setup that we had on the previous video, then we'll move on. And think of this as 2 exposures. If you break it down to a flash exposure and a background exposure, it becomes a lot simpler. We're just going to do it all in one shot. So let's deal with flash first. Now I've got my flash in a small softbox here, and this is the Flashpoint lithium-ion speedlight. It will go all the way down to 1/128th of its full power. That is not a lot of flash, but when you look at the shot, it's a lot more flash than this shot needs, at least in my opinion. Now, that's okay. How do I get that lower? I can't go any lower on my ISO. I can't reduce the flash power anymore. I could move the flash backwards, but well, I'd have to put it through the wall, so that wouldn't work. There's a couple of other things you could try. You could, for example, cover the flash with something. Now, this softbox has a couple of covers, so it is reducing the power of the flash because it has to pass through the material. If it's still too bright like that, I can add in something like a softener to the front of the flash. These little diffusers, they cut out a stop or more of light, so that will reduce the power down. I could also get the flash and move it. So rather than having it sort of where you would normally put a flash, I'm actually going to put it where you wouldn't, behind the light. But then I'm going to angle the flash so it doesn't contaminate the background. And what I've done is I've made a much smaller area of softbox that's going to reach the actual bulb itself. Now obviously some will bounce off the wall behind me and will make it a little bit of spill, but that's fine. I don't think that's going to worry me too much. But that should drastically reduce the amount of light and just give a little dash of highlight on the bulb, which is what I want for this shot. Now, when you look at this, of course, what actually happens is the bulb's okay, but that background is so dark. That's because I'm shooting at a 200th of a second shutter speed. Now for flash in the studio, that's where I work, 200th of a second. But to record those dim lights and that background, I need to reduce the shutter speed so there's enough time for that light to grow and hit the sensor and fill it with light. So I'm going to come down here to my shutter speed. I'm going to change my shutter speed down from 200th of a second, 1/4 of a second. Let's go right down that low. The amount will vary upon the look, the amount of light on your background, and a whole bunch of other things. So it's a trial and error. But I reckon 1/4 of a second combined with the flash, that gives me the exposure I want. The flash lasts for a tiny period of time. It doesn't matter about the shutter speed. It's all about recording the ambient and letting that soak through on that longer exposure. So I get effectively an exposure for flash and an exposure for the ambient. My second tip is a really quick and simple way to increase the amount of bokeh in your shot. And I don't mean the physical size, I mean the sheer quantity of it, the number of circles. And it really involves one of these, a shiny surface, because I'm going to make a reflection. And the reflection will, of course, reflect not only the subject, but the background as well. So I've got a black shiny tile for my reflective surface. You might want to try something different, maybe a white shiny tile. You'll get different results. I like what black does because it really slightly dims down the reflection. I think that helps tremendously. So settings wise, I'm still going to light this with flash. You can imagine why flash would be useful in this case, because I've got a watch here. I can't rear illuminate it. It just doesn't work that way. Of course, if you're sitting there thinking, well, couldn't you use some other sort of continuous light? Yes, you could, by all means. I just like to use flash because it's always in my studio. All I have to do is frame this up, take the shot, and instantly I get a great reflection from this black tile. It's worth noting, if you're going to use any reflective surface, you need to clean this, remove any dust, any dirt from it, because it will show in the end pictures. But that's a really quick and simple way of giving you lots more bokeh for no more work. So my third and final tip is all about the shape of the background bokeh. Now, I love that round shape, I really do, but if you ever get bored of it, you can change it. Now remember, back in the first video I said that the shape of the bokeh was down to the light passing through the lens, the shape of the lens inside. Well, if you change the shape of light, you change the bokeh. And in this case, what I've done is I've cut myself out a little piece of black card, light tight card, and in the middle I've cut a shape. And that is going to become the shape of my background bokeh. Now, I'll be honest with you, I'm rubbish at craft. I can't do anything like that. So I used a hole punch for this, give me a nice clean shape. I'm just going to stick it over the front of the lens. Same lighting, same reflections, different product this time. Take a picture, and when I do, end result is, well, it's different background bokeh. It has a lovely shape to it. It's great, and it's that easy to do. Now, it's worth saying the actual size of your hole, well, that might be different depending on a few things. The distance of the background lights, the focal length of the lens, the sensor size of the camera you're using. All of these things will combine together to mean that you might find you need to have a bigger hole or a smaller hole, depending on what works. Experimentation is the key. You might also find a little bit of vignetting at the corners and definitely some distortion around the edges. That's all part of the fun. You can always crop that out if it bothers you. Okay, so that's a couple of tips on how to get better bokeh effects. Let's jump into Photoshop and just do a little bit of correction on one of the images. Once again, all the time spent in the photography side of things pays dividends here in Photoshop. Although there isn't no Photoshop, there's always some to do, it's not going to be too big or dramatic. But the changes I'm going to make should elevate a good picture just to that next level of being a clean, tidy and complete shot. Let's have a look. So the picture I want to work on is the watch. I love the watch. You've got the round watch, the round bokeh. It all goes together really nicely. But when you start looking close, you can see a few odd things, like here, there's the blue tack that I use just to hold the watch in place. I'm going to remove that by getting the spot healing brush, which is my go-to tool. Whenever I want to try and quickly remove, heal or clone something out, I'll jump in with this tool because it does a really good job really quickly. And anything like the bokeh, you've got to look and see things like this where it may be a bit of dust on the lens or inside of the lens. You often get little weird things like that appearing. Also, if you're using a tile as a reflective background, look out for any half-cut sort of bokeh bits here and try and remove those too. You can find with the spot healing brush, however, trying to do that gives an unpleasing result because blurry, soft backgrounds don't always work with the spot healing brush. Try something like the patch tool or just a good old-fashioned clone stamp tool. That will often give a much better result. Now, the actual face of the watch is the thing I want to work on next, because with a large softbox and a small object, it's hard to control the direction of light. And I'd like a nice little graduated lighting effect on the watch face. And it's pretty simple to do that inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to get the picture here, which actually started life as a RAW file, and take it back into RAW by going to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. And then I'm going to get the local adjustment tool, the adjustment brush, and I'll drop the exposure, yeah, half a stop, that sounds okay. Let's bring the highlights down and we'll push the clarity up. And I'm just going to paint with a nice big brush over the lower half of the watch face, just to add a little bit of shadow in there. The new dehaze filter is really nice as well, so I'll add a bit more of that in. I find that works very nicely too. And once I've done a bit of painting, I can then just control it like that. Now that works okay, but if I do the main watch, of course, you have to do the reflection as well, and you do that in the opposite direction. But there's a little kind of highlight there, so let's get a new brush and we'll just drop the exposure down with a much smaller brush. That could be something on the tile, but it's just a little distracting, so just so we can just darken that area down. Yeah, there we go, and that just works really well. Okay, the front of the face I think needs just a hint more brightness as well, so we'll add just a a third brush in there just to lighten that area up and put some brightness in there too. And there you go. There is my final picture completed. Well, if you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more from myself and the other amazing presenters right here on Adorama TV, you've got to click on the subscribe button. I'm Gavin Hoey. Thanks for watching.
Do you want great looking prints at low cost? Be sure to visit our easy to use online printing service. Adorama Pix has professionals who treat your images with the utmost care that you can count on. For a quick turnaround on photos, cards, or albums, use AdoramaPix.com.